Good morning, dear colleagues. I hope the mic is on. Good morning. Good morning, dear colleagues. Finally, everything works. I would like to welcome all delegates of this Moscow Economic Forum in this hall. I have a role of moderator in this plenary session. We also articulated the topic of this discussion in a very tricky way: social policy and human potential at the basis of the Russian modernization. You also heard about the so-called social lady. This is actually the social program, which is a lady in Russian which should get off the bus and shouldn't go with us further, because this is the current attitude to the social problems. And many of you actually wanted to save on people in the past. Now they have changed their mind and require also the change in the legislation and to turn it towards the social policy. And what is the human potential in this case at the basis of the Russian modernization? This is something what we will discuss with the panelists here. And I would like to give the whole floor to the Nina Kuzmina, Deputy Chairman of the Russian Independent Trade Unions Federation, Rector of the Academy of Labor and Social Relations. She's a very interesting lady, and I will be happy to listen to what she's gonna say. And I would like to also tell you that you have 7 minutes to speak, and then every single mic will be on. And at the end, we will also ask all the panelists to answer one question. Nina, you're welcome. Thank you, Oleg. Thank you very much separately for this introduction. I want my presentation to be shown on the screen because I'm really strictly limited on time. Please show my presentation. And the topic of my speech is set by Oleg in a very strict way: the remuneration in the Russian Federation, the position of trade unions, and I will explain you why. Dear delegates and panelists, here on this slide you can see the trend of the monthly remuneration in Russian Federation. You can see that the trend is positive here, but is it really so in reality? On this particular slide, you can see the distribution of the remuneration on 10% groups of workers. And here you can see the results of the Rosstat study in April 2017. I want you to pay attention to this particular chart. Here you can see that probably 50% of the whole remuneration or payroll goes to the upper to top 20%. And we talk about the mean remuneration is actually 21,323 rubles. It covers only the group 6 here. So in this case, we can see that even the mean remuneration or salary is even below the red line, and the red line is the minimum living budget. Because many of you already know that we have a certain limit to guarantee the remuneration is actually the so-called living minimum for Russian population, because this living minimum is not enough to compensate all the expenses of the labor power, because only the budget of the next level, which is the minimum consumer budget, can allow to cover all these expenses of the labor power. If we call this minimum consumer budget the cost of labor. So in this case, 2/3 of our working Russians are paid below this level. And I want really you to understand how it looks like with the remuneration of the labor power in the Russian Federation, what consequences can be. And this situation was not only last year. In 2015, this situation looked very similar. And I would like to draw your attention to the fact that in 2015 and in 2015, these guarantees for the remuneration in the country came to the situation that every similar family should have the situation when two people working with maximum one child. If you have a family with more children, in this case, you can live below the red line. And in this slide, you can also see the total amount of salary paid into 2013, this is in 2011, and so on. And you can see that we don't have any significant changes. And if we also look deeper into the history, we have been having the same situation for the last 25 years. So the remuneration haven't paid all the expenses of the labor power. If a certain product has been paid for a long time below the cost of sale, so the quality of this product goes down, and the supply of this product goes down too, because the labor is also a kind of product, is a specific product, but a product, and the market economy also works for this product. What is the main problem? Along with the financial limitations, we also have HR limitations and the poor quality of labor or manpower. Another point, which is actually mentioned by many experts, we talk here about the labor efficiency, but now we calculate the labor efficiency in another way than we used to do it in the Soviet times. If we look how we calculate the labor efficiency now, we can also understand that this doesn't relate to the actions or work of a particular employee or worker. In this case, we can see also the calculation made in a bit wrong way. So, and finally, we get also quite a wrong labor efficiency, which is compared with the remuneration trend. But we also we talk about the full employment, but we also don't have this situation that the people are working on a full scale, because sometimes they are on the so-called vacations when the employers ask them not to be in the office or to be at work or to be on vacation. But anyway, we don't take it into account. Or, for example, we don't really calculate the labor efficiency, for example, in education, in the medical and health care. But we do have some labor efficiency also there. And if the Ministry of Culture doesn't finance the culture, we can get a lower labor efficiency in this area. But in reality, the labor efficiency in the culture is higher. Quite often, we also can hear that we have quite a low labor efficiency in comparison with the developed countries. But if we compare the labor efficiency with 1 ruble of remuneration, these figures show that our Russian worker is 3 times more efficient than the German or Spanish employees, except for the energy sector. And also use different sources of information in order to show that these are not only the trends which we observe. Unfortunately, I'm not able to be within my 7 minutes. I have more information available for you. What should I do? Nina, how much time do you need to finish? Probably I need 1/2 minutes. So we will also give this 1/2 minutes more for you. The colleagues, the limits are really strict, but you have these additional 90 seconds. And here are the standard results from the High School of Economics. That if we talk about the value added value or in the industry, in the share of the remuneration in this added value in the industry, it is also quite high, and it also happens everywhere in the world. Let's talk about the share of the labor in different products. For example, in iPhone 6, when it was manufactured, the initial price was $649, and only $4 were for the labor cost. This is a T-shirt from Germany. It is 4.5 euros, is very low. And this is about the sports shoes. You can see also the share of labor here in this 120 euros. This is how the global economy functions. This is we talk about the global supply chain, the global value creation, because many parts of this chain are offshoreized. So in this case, in some of the economies get catastrophically less money, little money, and it is actually not equal. Now we go back to Russia. If we talk about the current living basket plus taxes, this should be also a limit on which shouldn't be related to the remuneration. If we talk about the remuneration, so the minimum guarantee for the remuneration should be the so-called minimum consumer budget, which also allows the people to not only to live but also to purchase something more, because the minimum recovery consumer budget is represented on this particular slide. Here we have not only the absolute minimum to live, you can also have here we have also money to make savings, because in the market economy every single production factor should generate an income to the owner, and the remuneration should also not only cover the labor cost but also should give profit to the laborers and the workers in order to invest in themselves. You deserve the applause, and I would like to say that we also got a welcome letter from Olga Golodets, who is a deputy prime minister. And if Olga Golodets were the minister of finance, we would have another social policy, because I really know it as an insider. Unfortunately, we don't have any time for this additional question to Nina. Now we come over to the second part of our discussion. And as you know, and as Arthur Schopenhauer said, our happiness depends on our health by 80%, but 70% of the Russians are worried about the current status of the healthcare system in this country. That's why I would like to ask Pavel Vorobyov, who is the head of the Hematology and Geriatrics Department of the IPE in the first Moscow State Medical University, and he is currently the governor's counselor in the Ural region. Pavel, you have the floor. Please be within the time limit given. Thank you very much, dear friends. I would like to be within the time limit, and I will just tell you exact things without any figures and slides. When we talk about the healthcare system, usually we use our own experience and we talk about the so-called urban healthcare system, but most of the problems we have in villages, and we have millions of Russians living there, and they live in the worst conditions. And the problems of the health care are getting bigger and bigger, and nobody resolves them. We only are told about the illusions how to resolve these problems, but in reality it is not so. Our society and the experts are not ready to discuss these problems, but however they are aware of them, but we can also look at them from another side, and we can also find how to resolve them. I also made several studies and tours in order to find solutions how to make the healthcare system equal for everybody. I was in Urals, in Sahel, in Siberia, and I was almost in all Russian regions. I usually visit small towns and villages, and I can also have an opportunity to make a more general conclusion in small villages, and I can say that there is almost no health care in small towns and villages. But in this case, we also get a so-called healthcare substitute. These are probably some actually non-educated, because now we have more healers instead of doctors in the villages, and they actually substitute now the real healthcare system. But we need to understand that this paid healthcare is usually more just a robbery than a real health. Now, in the current healthcare system, we wanted to provide access to the healthcare providers, but now we also have a decreasing number of healthcare providers. We also have now a significant demand for the doctors and paramedics in the villages, because only 50% of these positions are occupied at the moment. As for the treatment of main diseases, with these are diabetes, hypertension, the heart failure, and the chronic lung disease and different tumors. These diseases are usually treated with drugs, and this is the area of the self-treatment. So people treat themselves without any help from the healthcare provider, and the responsibility of self-treatment is related with the availability of free drugs. On the one side, we spend millions of dollars or billions of rubles in order to treat 300 people in the country. And we talk about the real facts, about real diseases, and millions of Russians have no access to the free, cheap drugs which will allow them to live longer and happier. Well, there is also another program which is the preference monetization. It's an anti-human program, because sometimes it also relates around 30% of the people, because we have an opportunity to take money instead of free drugs, and this money goes now through the pension fund, and don't even touch the healthcare system. So, and if you submit your application, once you get more money in a month, but you don't get any free drugs. In this case, the government buys your lives, and the number of people who file these applications in some of the regions amount to 95%, and this program should be banned. If we talk about the general practitioners, this is actually the doctor which can provide you different medical support, but unfortunately this program is already outdated at the level of 1995. Sometimes we also have, for example, the X-ray guy, or for example the gynecologist, psychiatrist, and endocrinologist as a one person. Can you also imagine if this actually multi-qualified doctor can provide you a good health and good support? Unfortunately, it is sometimes impossible actually to pay all these salaries to all these doctors. That's why we have this situation when one doctor has officially several qualifications and provides healthcare service in many areas. And what could be a solution? We can create hospitals where we can have actual specialists, and in smaller villages we can also create the outpatient care centers with the general practitioners. Yeah, now many people have computers or even tablet PCs, and the patients can use internet in order to control themselves and to treat themselves. But they need drugs, and we can use the drug machines, which can also give people the required amount of drugs against code entered. See, we also need to develop the medical technologies and to use more terminals. You can also enter just one terminal cost probably 100 or 200,000 rubles. And the last question was about the insurance companies. They should be closed because they consume 10 to 15% of the healthcare system, and they don't give any additional value. I think the medical funds are able to distribute all the money they direct to the medical facilities, because our current funds also set limits for every single medical facility or healthcare facility. And I just want to bring an order to everything what we have. And now we don't need to ask for more money. We just need to reassess the current opportunities and technologies we can use. And these technologies are modern. This is not a return to old times, but we now waste a lot of money and always ask to get more. Thank you, Pavel. I would like to make a small remark. In Russia, 4% of our GDP go to the healthcare system, and the limit or the standard of the WHO is 6%. Pavel, you will have also an opportunity to say what you want as a contradiction at the end. You also know that we are currently in the building of the Russian Academy of Science. Now I'm pleased to give the floor to Vladimir Ivanov, who is the corresponding member of the Russian Academy of Science and deputy president of the Russian Academy of Science. And as I was sad that the yesterday's speech of the president of the Russian Academy of Science made a shock, because he proposed to reform the unified school exam. Thank you very much. Can you give me the clicker for my presentation? Dear friends and colleagues, when we talk about social issues and educational issues, we have to take into account two important factors. We need to take into account the global trends, and second, we shouldn't consider this particular area separately from the whole economic situation in the country. And this is actually two basics for my presentation. On the 1st of March, the Russian president set a new vector for the development of our country in order to increase the quality of life. Not so long ago, we had another goal of development to double the GDP, and now we come over to increase the quality of life. We need actually to catch the technological lacking behind, and also to increase the level of life for our people. Now we have as a global technical humanitarian revolution. We need to increase the quality of life based on new technologies, and the basic question is the paradigm change, because the economy should exist for people, not people for the economy. In the previous speeches, we were shown the level of the remuneration and health care. And why is it so? Because there is one wish actually to tag the maximum human resource in order to get the maximum profit, and the target of spending this profit has not been defined yet. Yesterday we heard here how much money was sent to restore and to support the banking system, but where did this money disappear? This question is still open. So the main problem is that we need to come over to the paradigm economy for the people, not people for the economy. And we need also to change our environment because thanks to the technologies we have an absolutely different environment. We are not living in the nature anymore, but in reality we are surrounded by technologies. If you are in this hall and we are surrounded by the technologies including the air, the next nature is actually probably 10 kilometers away, and new technologies require a new culture. Because if we also remember all the technological catastrophes starting from the nuclear bombing in 1945 and everything what we saw last month, but there is one thing in common: it's a lack of technological culture. And in this case, we get two new factors. We have the environment of technologies. We need to create technologies which will help us. And the second is the culture, how we deal with these technologies. Our modern environment looks as follows. That's a human being surrounded by technologies, and these technologies are surrounded by the nature. And this is the reality. These are the main uh, uh, the main image of the current technological revolution, when we have also transformation in the environment and we are building currently the post-industrial society. The post-industrial society is the society where people are not involved into the industrial labor, so where the people do not physically work. That is the digital revolution we have been talking about for a long time, but we also need to change the education system here. We also do see some changes now, because how to create this post-industrial society. This is actually not level 5 or level 6, as Mr. Glasiev said yesterday. This is actually the level where we need to guarantee or to increase the quality of life. And where are we now, and what do we expect? We can also expect a new world order where the technological leaders, country leaders, will take the first place. As for Russia, we have a chance to go any of these three trajectories, depending on this decision we make now. But where are we now? So the main, because at the moment the management of the fundamental science is now within the manager's hands. So in this case, actually the scientific and technological space is disintegrated, and this is the direct threat for the national security. We have the low level of resource support. We also have a very poor quality of scientific resources, and we also have a lower number of scientists, what is actually very sad, because if we lose our qualified people, it means that we are going not to the direction of development.
Just for your information, since the start of the reform, we lost nearly the size of two physical institutes of the Academy of Sciences. I'm sure this is something that is self-explanatory to you. So this is how our science is being managed right now. It's disbalanced. There are 4 centers for making decisions. They do not interact with each other strongly, and the function of science management is regulated by 6 laws, at least for now, and they are not really related to each other. And speaking about how the President's May order was fulfilled, according to that order, the size of contribution of science to the GDP by 2015 was supposed to be 1.77. That goal was not achieved. Let me say a few conclusions. The system is far from being perfect. We need to develop a system for developing the personnel. And now let's talk about the actual issue that is in our agenda. The quality of life is one of the main factors of competitiveness of the state. If we have high living standards, we can succeed. In the developed nations, science, we have 30 seconds more. Science are the basic elements and not a service, and the state is responsible for making sure that that happens. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And as we know, Charles de Gaulle said, culture is the oil of France. We have both oil and culture, thank God. And I think for Russia, culture is even more important than oil. It is with great pleasure that I would give the floor to Ileana Shevchenko, the meritorious actress of Russia. And she's the first deputy chairman of the State Duma Committee on Culture. Ileana, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Oleg. Having heard to the said reports of my colleagues, I would like to say that as far as the ballet is concerned, we're still pretty advanced. And the culture of the Russian Federation of the recent years have attracted attention to itself. We have been demanding from the government, from the president, to pay attention to the national culture. We've even demanded that we start a national program in the area of culture. It didn't materialize, but life itself told our government, made our government to pay attention to culture. Because there are external threats, there is also a requirement that we have internal domestic stability, and that means that culture is indeed an expression of ideology. What is culture? What does culture do? Some 20 years ago, people would say that this is a kind of a service in the area of entertaining people. More serious people, philosophers, would say, and they did say this a long time ago, 200 years ago, that culture is the mechanism for building meanings and culture in the society. And it is through that we explain to the people what is the meaning of life of the individual, the people, the mankind, the way we understand it. And this builds the system of values. Today, we are at the crossroads. The main value, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, was to build a system that is geared towards consumption. We were putting together an individual that would be a savvy consumer. But just recently, they started talking about building a human being that is creative. The person that would build around himself an environment rather than being formed by the environment around that individual. And these are the things that were set as goals before the national culture. Our institutes were tasked with that assignment. And I would say that we haven't made a lot of progress, although we had some progress. Culture has been really receptive to those innovations that we now have in the world. Let's talk about the remote communications. In Russia, we have the largest information system for the Russian citizens that tells them about what's happening not just in the federal centers in terms of culture in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and others, but online today, anyone can find out from their tablets or phones, track news in the area of culture in all regions of Russia and even in the small towns. Just go to the web portal called culture.rf. So today we are connecting everything to the internet and we are trying to achieve perfection. The next topic I'd like to talk about is we're trying to get to the remote outback areas, trying to preserve what we have there. The national and local folk crafts and arts, money has been earmarked in the budget for the restoration of the clubs that were built in the 70s and the 80s of the 20th century, the ones that became decrepit, and we're now trying to reanimate those clubs. We are now walking down the path of creating a system that is called the National Electronic Library. It's slated to be one of the largest in the world. Maybe it's interesting to say a few words about it, because this National Electronic Library is something that is unique, stands alone in the world. It's a library resource with distributed resources. Well, there are a lot of libraries in the world, data centers, where you would aggregate all of the data. This system would allow you to have repositories of resources in a distribution sort of way. And if we are able to overcome some internal difficulties, it would be possible to make sure that 100% of everything that is created and published in Russia next year would be coming into this resource system. However, there is a copyright issue, and also the other issue ensues. If we buy these works of art from the authors, so we would not have enough money in the budget. Instead, we are proposing a different thing. We will store 100%, but we'll pay the authors, the writers, only based upon people accessing their works of art, some kind of royalty. That's going to be the approach, and if we succeed with that, maybe we will overcome all of the difficulties. And unfortunately, science is not part of that overall arrangement, and it will take time for them to overcome some technological difficulties that they have encountered. We have a lot of achievements externally. Foreign policy is one example, but we also have some problems. And we deal with a number of those issues within the State Duma, in the Committee on Culture. The main problem today is that we haven't yet resolved the issue of what kind of place should culture be taking in the hierarchy of the state's values. We've studied our laws, and we found out that we're not the social sphere, because the only law that talks about this is the law on the government of the Russian Federation, and it's mentioned some of the responsibilities and obligations of the government in the area of culture, science, and education. And it looks like we are not really a socially minded system. And I would like you to start thinking about it in that way. And the other thing we are doing right now is we are trying to make sure that we have a proper relationship between the state, the society, and culture. Over the last 3 years, we have been able to create a document that is called the Foundations of the Government of the State, a Cultural Policy, which explains, as a memorandum, certain ideas that we are relying on traditional values. You have 30 seconds extra. That we have traditional values that we rely upon, and then based on this, we will have to write a law on culture. Today's law on culture is older than our constitution, but for 30 years, we haven't been successful agreeing on 4 different versions or iterations of this law, because we haven't yet decided what should be the relationship between the state and culture. Does the state manage culture? Is the culture going to be owing something to the state? And this is not something that has been identified. And until that has been done, there will be no law on culture, and we'll be fixing things in a fixer-upper manner, wherever those problems arrive, trying to patch things up. And we need to, resolve principal things. The issue of freedom of creativity, and what should the government be funding, it is quite important, and this is something that the society wants to find an answer to. Thank you very much, Ileana. I would like to say something that would sound paradoxical to you, maybe. I've been in many audiences where I met with people representing education, medicine, and culture. I say the same thing. Do not believe that you are part of the service industry. You are not part of the service industry. Instead, the place that was once occupied by the first section of the production facility is now occupied by the human potential. So you are the members of the production system. You are trying to reproduce the human being. Maybe you would disagree with me, but today culture is our priority, and there are certain privileges that go to that. And I would like to give the floor to Valentina Muzyczuk, the Doctor of Sciences, and she is the Deputy Director for Research at the Institute of Economics of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and she is the Professor of the Producer Department of the Moscow Art Theater School. Maybe she would talk about culture to us as well. Good morning, dear colleagues. Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to this event. I will be talking about the subject of this session. Mr. Greenberg formulated to me what I should be talking about. I will be talking about those issues that exist today within the management of culture system. And however, the topic of my speech may sound too ambitious: unification, optimization, commercialization in the sphere of culture. Is this the Pyrrhic victory, or are those the tortures and woes of Tantalus? Everything that has been happening over the last 20 years has been not really friendly towards culture. And those unfriendly steps that have been made over the last 20 years towards culture are the things that are very similar to what we're seeing in the area of education and science. But I will focus on culture because in this field there are no winners. And on the one hand, this is the Pyrrhic victory for those who were conducting those reforms, and that they are also the woes of Tantalus, who will have to live according to these laws. Sorry for the busy slides, but if we talk about one of the key issues or problems that exist about the slogan of unification, I'd like to say that the entire budgetary sector, regardless of whether it is something that belongs to social security, education, science, or culture, all of this will be equated to providing services, something that has already been alluded to. And as the result of this unification, what we've seen is the ignoring of the specificity of what culture is about. On the one hand, we underestimate that it is primarily the creative process that prevails in the culture. And we talk about culture as something that is done by unique individuals, and you cannot standardize this. And we cannot ask for a particular tangible result, because the results of culture are quite intangible in most cases. And that applies to the entire humanitarian sector. This result is not something that can be done overnight. It's something that will be happening over a longer period of time. So you need to take into account not just the result itself, but also the process. And now, in the context of what the charters of our culture institutions say they act as the agencies of the government providing services in the area of culture. And if we want to help culture and get out of this conundrum, we need to move towards unification, towards specialization, and we need to take into account the fact that this is a very specific sector of the economy. And we've talked about the quality of competitiveness that gives us certain advantages. That shows that the institutes that have been created, they are converting themselves into an institutional trap, and they provide some backlash, and they act in a different way than they were designed. The next one I would like to talk about is the optimization of culture. We know optimization is the choice of the most optimal solution, but unfortunately, according to the Ministry of Finance, this has bogged down to essentially reducing the funding for many major areas, and that has affected the houses of culture in the rural areas, clubs, and so on and so forth. The numbers are on the screen. I don't have the time to go through all of them, but this optimization that I'm talking about and unification is something that we need to struggle with. We need to fight it. because education is not a service. But these are just words, because we need to start taking active action. And in order to do that, we need to take culture and the entire humanitarian sector of the economy out of the segment which is called the provision of government or municipal services. Establishments of culture, science, and education are not the continuation of governmental agencies. They are not supposed to provide any services. The next one, which is quite painful to the area of culture, is commercialization. We all know that now it's an unspoken imperative that the institutions of culture should earn as much as possible, which means that one of the key performance indicators that would be used by the Minister of Culture would be the level of income that an institution earns. But if we look at the charters of the institutions of culture, we would see that they're primarily non-commercial organization, not-for-profit organization. Therefore, earning money is not acceptable for those organizations. And we stopped talking about culture in the terms of enlightenment or education. It's just essentially entertainment and spending good time in extra hours. And this distorts the economic effect. And it's just because instead of being one of the means, it becomes the self-professed end. And this is all based on business approaches. We should stray away from using the principles of cost effectiveness and focus rather on the public good that these activities bring to the society. Another painful issue is related to the so-called culture metrics, which is similar to science metrics, when you would have the quantitative approach prevailing over the qualitative one, and the instrumentation you would use would be sometimes absurd. There was a recent innovation that introduced certain norms of labor in the area of culture, and they apply to everything to let's say, creating props. In order to create a sky on a stage, you would need 0.29 man-hours, and if it's the sky which has shower clouds, you would need 0.4 man-hours. But if it's a difficult to paint sky, it's going to be 0.8 man-hours. So they are placing an emphasis on some quantitative measures for the economic effect produced by the organization, which produces additional pressure on the amount of documentation. Therefore, we need to invite the experts from the community and deal with this so that we could go away from using this quantitative approach. And instead of concluding, I would like to say that we keep talking about the government as the carrier of the long-term goods of the society, benefits of the society, but it turns out that the government is now looking towards commercialization and privatization of the area of culture. But if we want the culture to continue evolving, we need to have a minimum program. We need to increase the social status of culture and of the entire humanitarian sector of the economy. And the experts have been talking for a long time about the need of this, and maybe we should need to introduce a position of the special vice prime minister for the humanitarian development. And we also need to place culture in the entire humanitarian sector out of the segment of provision of services. And we need to increase expenditure in the area of culture and education and science, and provide the ability to get budgetary funds to the non-governmental organizations. And there is now a law on the social order, and create a coordination body. Please turn on the microphone for another 15 seconds. And so we should create a mechanism for cultural development, which is part of the governmental policy, which was adopted in 2014. But now it's 2018, and the institutions has not really been created. The committee was created, and it hasn't yet convened. And I would say this quote by Confucius: if you cannot achieve your goal, it doesn't mean that you should change the goal. You should just change your action plan. And this is what I would like to urge you to do, that start working on that action plan that would help us take the humanitarian sector of the economy out of the sphere that is called provision of services. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. We always compare ourselves with the others, and it looks like we are okay with Belay, and our army is essentially number 2 in the world, according to international experts, but it's not as good with the economy and the social sphere. Just recently, the World Bank published its data, which said that according to the level of GDP, we've moved from the second group of countries to the third group of countries. We're next to Romania now, and even Equatorial Guinea is somewhere close to us, and that happened over the last 10 years. And how things are from the standpoint of the international experts, this is what we would like to ask Marco Riccieri to talk to us. And Marco Riccieri is the General Secretary of the European Institute for Political, Economic and Social Research. Marco, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very honored to be here. And let me thank first the interpreter for excellent interpretariat they are doing in this conference. I want to share with you some experience we had in Europe and Italy also. Starting from this point, what we are living, it's, we can define it as a great correction. Now, on the basis of this great correction, social policy is again at the center of the table, at the center of the attention of all governments and union and civil society organizations. So after years in which we lived very extremist liberalism, now we have this shift with more attention to social policy. What is the reference, the main reference for this? The main reference is the Agenda 2030 approved by United Nations on Sustainable Development. Its goals and tasks very concrete, with specific duties for scientific world and academic world. Academic world is required to design solutions that are sustainable, of course, but also ethical acceptable. Ethical acceptable is another concept, completely different concept, and deals with the culture, with the idea of the quality of life, with the quality of social relations, and so on. I invite you to read the special program that were annexed to the Agenda 2030. I start on this point because this document, it's signed by Russian government, by Italian government, by European states government, and so on. So it's a common duty, it's a common platform. The same concept, to pay attention to more attention to social policy, we can find in other common documents, as the documents signed by G20 summits. What means this correction? First, we are reading in OECD documents a change of approach. For years, they say to us that first come production, then distribution. Now, OECD, so the most important institution of industrialized countries, say to us, no, we did a mistake, now we must take attention in parallel with the production and distribution. They are the two sides of the same coin. When we talk about distribution, we're talking about high level of inequality, precarization of our societies, and cohesion of our society, social cohesion of our society. This is an important change of approach that we have now. So to pay more attention to the quality of development more than to the quantity of development. Another a very key point of this change is that we start to consider now the social policy as a productive factor. No more assistance. I lose money to make assistance. It's a need I have to do, but it's not productive. No. Now, OECD, United Nations, European Union, the International Monetary Fund, World Bank say, pay attention, social policy are a productive factor. It's very important, very innovative, and it's a common commitment for all of us. I see that you start to do some similar reflection inside your BRICS coordination. You have this important coordination among China, Russia, South Africa, Brazil, and so on. And you have meetings with labor minister and on social policy. This is a very important issue. Considering the European experience, I draw your attention on this fact. In November 2007, they approved the European Pillar of Social Rights. So European Union is going to design a new system of social rights. That's very important because their rights is not only political commitments, but are constitutional rights. In this, this chose is considered strategic for building the same economic and monetary union. That is the most important project of our European Union. And they did this because they consider openly that without making a right approach to social problem, the same economic and monetary system, it will be impossible. I have not the time to explain more in detail, but I invite you to read all the documents of this issue, new issues, new scenario that we have in Europe. In one particular, and I finish, considering the revolution we had in labor market, labor market.
30 секунд.
Just one word. Labor market must be considered the gateway to welfare system. No more a tool to enter in a company to find a place, but to enter in the welfare system as a whole. Thank you very much.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you, Mark. Dear colleagues, I would like also to make a small speech, if you allow me. I would like to draw conclusions here and say a couple of words relating to the problems of education. Dear friends, the thing I would like to comment right now is very simple. It is about the situation that the economy cannot really develop successfully without human beings, and everything what is useful for people is useful for the economy, and if we save on people, that's very dangerous and hazardous for the economy. From 2008 until 2016, the growth of the Russian economy was actually from 0.2 up to 4% a year. So, and the global economy was on the rise of 3.8% within the last years, and the Russian president said that the most important danger and threat for us was the growing economic lagging behind. And it is absolutely true. Why? We have been growing, and why actually? The answer is absolutely clear. For the market economy, we need also the buying power and the cheap loans, cheap financing, because the decrease of the level of life of our people is something what actually slowed down the development of our economy. We already talked that the salaries and remuneration in Russia is lower than in Europe and in other countries with a similar level of labor efficiency. We are ahead of India now. We are catch up the South Africa, and if I go the country name and Brazil, but we are actually 2.5 times below China and Turkey. Why the share of labor in the Russian products is 25-30%, in Europe 55-60%. Everybody understands that affects the level of life, but and cheap labor is not an efficient labor. This situation decreases the growth of labor efficiency. That's why we shouldn't wonder why this labor efficiency growth is so slow in the world. The Russian pensions are much lower than in Greece, despite all the crises. We don't talk about the pensions in Europe because now the pension amounts to 32-33% of this average salary. I think that's socially bad. I don't really not able to answer you how to survive in Russia getting this average pension, and there is also a negative effect because the buying power goes down and economic demand doesn't grow. So the State Duma and our colleagues in the State Duma actually refused to increase the pensions for the working pensions because it can also lead to the decrease of the life level of the pensioners. But we also look at the data from the Rosstat as soon as the people started working in the black market, so the losses of the pension fund went up. That's actually not the real savings achieved by the pension fund. As soon as we actually filed the draft law to increase the pensions, the date of a stat increased. We need to increase the retirement age, and I think it is something what we need to decide. And I think this decision is absolutely wrong because 45% Russian men cannot live until 60 years of age. So as our president said, you work and then you die, so you don't need to get any pension. But there is another economic situation because we have a lot of people working here in Russia and earning very low amount of money because Alexei Kudrin also says we don't only need to decrease the retirement age and also need to increase more robots. Probably we need probably to implement robots and to increase the retirement age. And also agree with Pavel that money is not always used in a good way, but even this 4% of GDP spent for the healthcare system do not allow our healthcare system to be efficient. And the people really care about it. And there are also expert assessment. If we increased the expenses for the healthcare up to 6%, and if we use this money in a good way, we could have saved actually people from the early death and can also compensate the deficit of the pension fund. Environmental protection. You also see what is happening in the Moscow region right now. But do you know that Sweden made a great business on garbage processing, and if Sweden is willing to buy our garbage to process, we need actually to make the separate garbage collection. We need to invest into the garbage processing, and it will be a profitable business. Science. Dear colleagues, it is absolutely clear that there is no science without technology, there is no modernization without technology, and the Russian Academy of Science said that the outflow of the high qualified people in Russia increased by 2 times within the last 3 years, and the total human resource outflow from Russia amounts to 18 million people. After the civil war in Russia in 1920s, only 4 million people. And Herman Graf, the head of Sberbank, also states that we also lost around $2 trillion since the beginning of the 1990s and until now. And another topic which is very close to me, this is the education. And the Ministry of Education and Science makes a report every single year about the future of the education policy, and it doesn't contain any system problems. And I think there are at least 12 such systematic problems. First, financing. In the healthcare, we all finance probably 2/3 of required. In education, we only finance 50% of what we really need. No other no other country managed actually to do the modernization, spending only 50% of what we need. But everybody acknowledges that the education is the key to the human potential. Also, the status of teachers. You also heard the report of the government and the orders of the grace of the president were fulfilled, but in 80 regions of 85, the teachers' salaries were not increased despite the presidential decree, and now around 60% of teachers are not satisfied with their status. Bureaucracy. Unfortunately, the bureaucracy goes high even in the science with this reform of the Russian Academy of Science, and also in education. Not so long ago, we adopted a new law which supported the Russian Academy of Science, which also gives back the power to the scientist. And also we'd like in the State Duma not made the first steps here. As for education, so every single educational facility files 300 reports a year in 12,000 indicators. So our Russian teachers spend most of their more than everybody else in the world in preparing these reports. The digital economy is not possible without digital education, and we really need this digital economy because that's a global trend. At the moment, we don't have any electronic, any digital university in comparison to other countries. What are the losses? Many millions of Russian citizens already use the Corsair, but how do the other foreign web portals work? They like an HR agencies. They usually track the most talented students or visitors, and they offer them actually places in universities abroad, and also an opportunity to work abroad. In this case, we have a high outflow of talents. We need to create our own online universities which could be of the same quality as the foreign ones. Another problem is actually the problem with the growing up in 1992. 60% of our adolescents were altruists, so we're able actually to co-feel, to understand the other people. Now only 15% of young people, of adolescents, are able to co-feel. I think that's a danger, a threat for the national security, and now we do see all the competitive individualism, which is a real threat for the national security, because we are really sure that we need another course in the educational policy. We also would like to create a draft law for education for everybody. Only 2 fractions supported this draft law except for the United Russia. But we shouldn't stop. We should do what we can. In the last legislative initiative is actually to exclude the educational services from the law of education, because the teachers don't provide educational services, they build our people. Thank you for your attention. Dear colleagues, we have 10 minutes left, and I would like to make a quick quiz for all the panelists. It should be quite unexpected for you. We have some favorite questions: what to do, who is guilty, and where do I have my glasses. Let's ask, who, what would you propose as to do as the first in order the Russian social policy become one the most important factor for our modernization? Nina, you are the first. I can also give you a very brief action. Actually, the adequate price of labor, because the labor should be also become more important for the economy. A cheap worker will never make a technological breakthrough in the world, build the digital economy. Thank you. Pavel, now the floor is yours. I think we need to get a lot of experts at the round table, officials, doctors, teachers, and to agree what we need to do for the sake of our patients, because the healthcare is for the patients and not for patients for the healthcare system. Thank you, Vladimir. I think we need to start with the goal setting. First of all, we need to develop the country development strategy oriented on or focused on the people. And second moment is we need to change the governmental management system. We need to have specialists instead of current officials. Ileana, I can agree with my colleagues, and especially with the fact that we need to change the governance system. For example, in culture, the literature is not in the area of responsibility of Ministry of Culture. We have different ministers, different vice prime ministers. But the Russian literature, which is the basic of the culture, is actually not within the responsibility of Ministry of Culture. We also have a lot of problems also in governing the humanitarian area. Thank you, Valentina. I will be very brief. We need to go away from this unification which has been developing here for the last 15 years. We need to be more specialized. We need to take into account the peculiarities of the humanitarian economy. If you'd like to develop a creative economy, if you'd like to be more talented and creative, actually we need to focus on those who create this creative class of people. And I can only join that we need actually to change the governance system, because currently we have actually significant lack in governance at the governmental level, so we need to actually to rectify the situation. Thank you. Marco, would you like to give a certain advice or recommendation?
More the politics has difficulties, more the academic, civil society organization must intensify the cooperation. And we have to build bridge, and we have as a tool the common platform in social policy, economic policy, and quality development policy. These are common problems. Let's work together using this platform that we have at disposal.
Спасибо.
Thank you. And also like to express my opinion. First of all, I would like to agree that we need a new strategy for the development of the country. And also think that the political fundament for it would be a common platform or union of business and labor power, because the business is something what can actually turn the wheel into the direction we need. And also think we can also use the 4 pillars. Pillar 1 is a new industrialization based on the new technologies. Second, that is more equal distribution because we are number 1 in social inequality. Number 3, that investments into human potential, including healthcare and culture and education. And number 4 is actually we need to get rid of the bureaucracy in our life, because now the symbol of the Russian bureaucracy is the closed doors in the well-known shopping center in Kemerovo. Dear friends, I would like to thank everybody who participated in this discussion. Unfortunately, the statement is made off the microphone. It cannot be translated. We apologize. Dear colleagues, I didn't take the mic of the audience. As for the law which we haven't adopted, I can also listen to you what law you were talking about. Because unfortunately we didn't adopt many important laws, not within the last parliament, also within the previous parliament. These are the results of the election campaign of 2016. Dear colleagues, we would like to finalize our session. I will be happy to take your questions individually. I'd like to thank all the audience. You're really the genius listeners. Thank you very much.